begin. All right, we're going to get started with the next session here. So this one is about, is Vancouver's operating permit program worth it? So we've got two gentlemen today that are coming up. We've got Philip White and Chris Radziminski. So Philip is the manager of plumbing and mechanical inspections and the gas safety manager. Philip White has over 25 years of experience designing, installing, and inspecting mechanical systems. He is the City of Vancouver's manager of plumbing and mechanical inspections and contributes to policy development and regulation design. Chris works closely with Philip on the development and implementation of plumbing-related regulations, addressing issues ranging from legionella to sewer outflows. He is a professional biologist, a professional engineer, and an EOCP certified small water system operator. His background includes a BSc in microbiology, an MASc in civil engineering, and a certificate in power equipment mechanics. So the two gentlemen are going to start the presentation, and let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. We're going to be presenting on legionella and cooling towers. So my name's Chris. I'm going to start with a little introduction to why this is even an issue in terms of water systems. My colleague Phil will describe cooling towers a little bit for those of you who aren't familiar with them, and then we'll describe what the City of Vancouver program is and some of the results that have come out of that program. So these are just some headlines from just last month in August, just to give a sense of what's going on out there. The top is from London, Ontario, and there was an outbreak there where there were 25 cases, one fatality. The local health authority there started going through the cooling towers, and they were finding legionella bacteria in a lot of the cooling towers. They haven't yet made the link, as far as we know, between any of the cases and those cooling towers. In New Hampshire, there was also a facility where they did link a cooling tower to 7 cases. And then one of the biggest ones that happened around that last month was in Melbourne in Australia, where they've identified a cooling tower that resulted in 114 confirmed cases of Legionnaire's disease, and most of those required hospitalization. So I'm going to talk next a little bit about what Legionella is, how people get sick from it, what the numbers are looking like in the US and in BC and in Canada, some local examples of outbreaks, and then, like I said, Phil will do a bit of introduction into cooling towers. So unlike traditional waterborne diseases where you think about somebody getting a glass of water and drinking it, think of like E. coli or cryptosporidium, you get Legionella by inhaling water droplets. So one of the key things is that systems that aren't well maintained can have amplification of Legionella bacteria, and then water that's aerosolized through something like a cooling tower or showers or hot tubs or decorative fountains, somebody walks by, inhales that mist, and can get Legionnaire's disease. So 1 in 10 cases is fatal. It's a pretty severe disease if you get it. And when you look at the numbers, most of us grew up in the era of Walkerton, think of E. coli, Campylobacter, Cryptosporidium in North Battleford, Saskatchewan. Those are all those fecal oral kind of root bacteria, right? So we do the treatment in the treatment plant, distribute it, get it to people's homes and businesses. This is very different because this is what they call an opportunistic premise plumbing pathogen. And from the US data now, it's the leading cause of drinking water related outbreaks, hospitalizations, and deaths. So you don't really hear much about E. coli anymore, cholera, Cryptosporidium, all that stuff. I mean, we got it pretty dialed in terms of treatment and distribution. But where things are falling down is actually at the premises. So when they looked at the US data for waterborne diseases, Legionella is responsible for 97% of the hospitalization and 97% of the deaths, right? Like this is the issue. And so what you're seeing on the screen are outbreaks from Legionella, are the dark brown bars, and it's increasing over time. And so in the US, when they look at the charts, this is from 2000, so over the last couple decades, you see these trends, and this is the same in Europe as well. And they're estimating about 70,000 cases per year now in the States. And again, 1 in 10 is fatal, right? It's about 1 in 4 when you get into a care facility or a hospital. Similarly, there's also a very strong seasonality to it. So these are US data again showing 2018, 2019, and you can see in the summer months it really increases. And that's one thing we're going to come back to when we're talking about cooling towers. And in BC and Canada, so the top line, the light blue, is the Canadian rate. The data is only up till 2021, and the BC rate hovers below that. So some examples that you may remember in recent years. So there was a cluster of cases in Langley last November. I don't know what the source of that one was. New West had some cases in 2020. That was traced to a cooling tower. And then Surrey, there were 14 cases with this, including 2 fatalities. It was inaccurately attributed to the Walmart. It wasn't Walmart. It was another facility that was across the street from the Guildford Mall. So that's a little bit about Legionella, how it's acquired through the aerosol. There's different ways that those aerosols can be produced, like the decorative features, showers, hot tubs. We're going to be focusing specifically in this presentation on cooling towers. And for those of you who aren't so familiar with cooling towers, my colleague Phil will now walk through how they work and some pictures from Vancouver of some of the cooling towers. So, Phil.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Just a show of hands, does anybody work on cooling towers here? So quite a few? Okay, great, thanks. So cooling towers is really straightforward. They take that heat out of the building, and it's similar to when you get out of a pool on a summer's day, you feel that coolness, that evaporation. It's the same thing for a cooling tower. You have that water going through the building, probably through, a majority of the time it goes through some type of refrigeration or chiller equipment down in the basement, back up to the cooling tower where it goes over the fill, and then you get that evaporation straight back down again. As you can see in this picture here, this is a City of Vancouver cooling tower, but you can see the red arrow showing that warmer water coming back. It gets dispersed over that fill. You get the evaporation happening, that heat taken out, and then heading back down to keep that cycle going. And then on where that yellow circle is, that'd be the blow down for that cooling tower. So as that water's evaporating out, that water needs to be made up too, right? So this is a typical cooling tower sump where, same as like a toilet, is where you've got that ball cock in and that's continuously replacing that water that's been evaporated. So cooling towers come in all shapes and sizes. We've got huge ones, and then we've got just tiny little ones that they kind of squeeze into parkades too, like after the fact. One thing that we've seen since this program's been developed is, there'll be a 6-7 story building put up, residential above, and then a grocery store wants to go in on the retail section. By that retail section, that needs a lot of cooling, so sometimes they squeeze cooling towers like into a parkade. And then it's like, okay, well, where's going to be the termination for them, right? So as we developed this program, so before this program started, there was no oversight of cooling towers on a municipal level. And the biggest thing we had to do was find out where all the cooling towers were. So we created the program, and the first year of the program was just register and tell us where the cooling tower is. That's all you had to do. There was no requirements for submitting lab reports or testing. It was just simply get a permit. Permit was free. Tell us where those towers are. And then at least we could start getting out there, making sure that there was some type of maintenance done on these towers. And this is what we were finding as we went out on our inspections. This tower is being replaced now, but it was just up the road here, and you could see that it's in a really poor state. And this is what we found throughout the city, that the maintenance on cooling towers was somewhat neglected. There was no, you had the guys that, like some of the larger hotels, where they had a very, their maintenance program, because they had hotels right across North America, they were all doing the same type of maintenance, and they were up here, where you had some on top of a retail section that nobody even knew there was a cooling tower there, right? So that there was a big discrepancy. And so with the operating permit program, basically there was a minimum now that everybody has to adhere to. So as you can see, this one, that red arrow is pointing right at the fresh air inlet for that building. So any aerosols coming off the top of that operating cooling tower. You could see how easily that could be dragged into that fresh air inlet and then dispersed over a crowd of people, this one. And then cooling towers, they're not going away, right? There's some push for like electrification, but at the end of the day, it's a tried, true method of removing that heat out of the building. And so even on new construction, we're still seeing a lot of cooling towers. And with densification, those cooling towers are getting closer and closer to residential units. This picture here, this is a GM place, I know it as, but I think it's called something else now. But you can see how close those towers are to that residential tower, and that area behind GM place there, that's all going to be developed too. So it's they're becoming more and more closer proximity to residential buildings. This is down in our river district. This is a City of Vancouver policy that kind of forced cooling towers here, but they have central heat and you can't return heat back to that plant. So the engineers decided, well, let's get rid of that heat and we'll put cooling towers on the building. And the problem here is you've got, 4 6-story wood frame residential buildings with retail on the bottom, and now they have to have this cooling tower maintained. And I don't know how many of you live in, you have a strata where you live, but trying to get them to clear the snow off the sidewalk's a big deal. So let alone a cooling tower and the problems that arise with them if they're not looked after. So not all cooling towers are on the roofs. We see cooling towers at ground level, and like I said, we see them put into underground parking areas. And this picture here, this wasn't a foggy day in Vancouver. This is a cooling tower in, I think it was October or November time. And you can see that that termination is right at street level. So if anybody walking through there, they're exposed to that evaporation off that tower. And so if that tower is not maintained, you could see, and we've actually seen people sleeping under there, like to get the warmth from it in the wintertime, right? So they're quite prevalent out there. So there was an outbreak in Napa County in California in 2022 where we had 17 cases, so 16 hospitalized, 10 in ICU, and 1 fatality. And they experienced what we had. Luckily, we didn't have this outbreak. We got the program out so we don't have this outbreak. But part of, as the inspectors went out, one of the things they saw was the lack of maintenance. So that lack of maintenance, it was right across the city for us and in Napa County, California as well. And when they traced where that Legionella outbreak was coming from, it came from a cooling tower. And literally, it was a clog in the pipe, and that biocide just wasn't getting into that pipe. And so that's all it took. And we've seen it ourselves. We've seen pumps on the chemical feeds breaking down, no biocide going into that tower, and all of a sudden, they take that monthly test, and we got a huge exceedance. And it doesn't take very long, right? Like if those dosing pumps shut down, and you're not getting biocide into that water, then that Legionella really spikes up. In Canada here, back in 2005, this was the worst case in Canada in Toronto area, where there was 135 cases, 23 fatalities. Once again, this was back to a cooling tower. And what came of that was a court case, like in nearly all these cases where somebody dies because of a neglected system. This court case, I don't know who's familiar here with Dr. Janet Stout, but she's like one of the North American gurus for Legionella. And, they asked her to be an expert witness. And basically what they said was that, Toronto Public Health failed to implement reasonable maintenance and monitoring of their cooling towers. And so across the country today, like Vancouver, the City of Vancouver, we have our program. Hamilton has a small program, and then now in New Brunswick, where they had, in 2019, they had 16 cases, and then nothing happened, and then in 2021, they had 8 cases with 1 fatality. So that spurred the government there to implement a registry and then a mechanism for testing as well. So now New Brunswick, the province of New Brunswick, has a registry and testing, and also the province of Quebec as well. So there's a few, you can see that it's starting to appear on government radars. This is a disease that can be controlled with proper maintenance. And I should say, like, it's a coolant, today we're concentrating on coolant towers, but we know in other areas too, you get legionella, such as domestic hot water, shower heads, that kind of thing too, right? So I'll pass it back over to Chris here.
Thanks, Phil. So as Phil just mentioned, we're just talking about cooling towers in this presentation, but we also have operating permits for decorative water fountains. We also have them for rainwater harvesting or non-potable systems and building water treatment systems. And if in the Q&A you have any questions about those systems, we're happy to answer them. And the numbers you see are the permits, the number of permits as of yesterday. So these are all the registered systems, and I'll show a map shortly where you can see where we know where they all are, which really helps the health authorities, so that if there is an outbreak like what had happened in Moncton, the health authorities didn't even know where cooling towers were. So they're looking at Google Earth images, they're looking at backflow prevention records, anything to get a sense of where are these things, and you lose valuable time. So they're trying to hunt these things down while an outbreak is happening. In Vancouver, the health authority knows where all the cooling towers are, so they hit the ground running, and same with all the other features as well. So the operating permit program is really modeled on what we are all familiar with in the province with Technical Safety BC. If you have any kind of elevating device, there's an expectation that you have maintenance requirements and you have an operating permit. So cooling towers are just another piece of mechanical equipment with the potential to injure or kill people, just like elevators. We don't accept hearing stories about elevators periodically plunging and killing people, so we shouldn't expect the same we should expect the same standard for mechanical equipment that can produce Legionnaire's disease cases. And so this is the most text-heavy slide. This is a summary of what's required in Vancouver. So you have to register your equipment. You have to conduct at least once a year cleaning and disinfection. You have to have a maintenance log, and we validate what you're doing by you submitting a monthly Legionella test result online while your system is active, and we'll be showing some of those results. And lastly, with the EOCP, we've created a building water system operator certification. Very straightforward. It's basically Legionella awareness, and so that's also a requirement for anybody who has an operating permit in Vancouver. And what that certification looks like is usually it's about a 2-day course. So you're familiar with EOCP's style of somebody trains you, then you take the EOCP exam, and then of course there's the ongoing continuing education. Sometimes we're asked about the ASSE IAPMO standard, which is even more robust, and we accept that in Vancouver as well, if you have that. So this is an example of what I just took a screenshot of in the downtown core. So these are just cooling towers. So you can see they're all over the place. There's 649 of them registered in the city of Vancouver. And one of the things that the Napa County example that Phil shared, that facility that was the source of the outbreak, nobody actually in that facility got sick. It was all people around, because with cooling towers you disperse aerosols over a wide range. It can be kilometers away that somebody's actually getting sick. So you can imagine if there were an outbreak in Vancouver, and thankfully there hasn't been one that we know of, it'd be very hard to track down without this information. So at least the health authorities can start drawing circles around 2 or 3 kilometer radius, and they know what cooling towers to look for. They have an added benefit in Vancouver as well. I not very randomly chose 1128 West Hastings, which is the building we're in right now, which has got a cooling tower. So anybody this is all public information. You can just go online and you can click on the cooling towers, and here you can see that their last Legionella report was submitted on August 13th, and they had no detectable Legionella in the cooling tower here. So anybody can go online, you can look at the different cooling towers. Further down, you can get the whole history of the cooling tower, any result that's ever been submitted. That's all public info. When we looked at the 2021 results, so we phased this program in gradually, as Phil had alluded to. In 2021, people just had to submit one result, just to get people used to contracting a laboratory, getting somebody organized to take a sample. In 2022, and to present day, you have to take it every month of operation. So when we looked at the 2021 results, we weren't surprised that there were some that had very large Legionella exceedances. As Phil said, there's a whole range of practices out there. So just breaking this down a little bit, in Vancouver, if you have 10 CFU per mil, colony forming units per mil, you need corrective action. They consider 50 to be something where it's a serious concern and you need to really trigger remediation, so we set the standard at 10. If you're at 1,000, it's like kind of like the red alert. You're really over the top. So we had 6 cooling towers in 2021 that were in that range, and then 24 cooling towers in between that 10 and 1,000 range. What was a bit concerning to us was everything you see with a plus sign in front of it is a hospital or a care facility. So that's where you have your most vulnerable populations with cooling towers that have legionella in it. And in fact, one of these cooling towers was right above the emergency department for one of these hospitals. So without this program, we wouldn't even know that this is going on in the city. So by having this insight, it prompts the building owner to rectify what's happening. There's a whole flow chart of what you have to do when you have results that are over 10 CFU per mil. So we're trying to deal with things proactively by having people submit the monthly test reports. We see how things are going, and then remediate when you're not doing so well. And what's really interesting too is you're the first audience that's seeing the 2022 and 2023 results. So the 2021 results we've published in a peer-reviewed paper. I'll give you the reference at the end. This will be submitting to a peer-reviewed journal as well. So what you're looking at here is month by month is how many cooling towers reported 10 CFU per mil or more. And so you can see that in 2022, those are the blue bars. There were exceedances that kind of followed that seasonal pattern that we had seen earlier. And in 2023, they dropped substantially. So what we're seeing is that just by having people measuring legionella, it's improving practices out in real life, which is great. And this is exactly what Quebec had seen as well when they introduced their province-wide program. And so what it looks like when you look at the different ranges of combinations of concentrations, this is the same data just presented differently. You can see that even in that red alert range, right, that 1,000 or more, there were 14 that reported over 1,000 CFU per mil in 2022, and that was halved in 2023. And we expect that trend to continue this year as well. Obviously, we're not finished the year yet, but we'll publish the data for that as well. So this work has been recognized by both EOCP and the CDC. So we were very surprised when back in 2019 there was a presentation by somebody from the US CDC, and of all the things they highlighted, in addition to New York City, which New York State has a similar program as well, they highlighted what we're doing in Vancouver, and EOCP was kind enough to give us the Innovation Award in 2021. Yeah. So that's a wrap-up of our presentation. We're more than happy to take questions, and it doesn't even have to be just on cooling towers like we said. There's our contact information and the journal article on the 2021 results. All of it's available on the operating permit webpage, so feel free to visit that, and that's where you'll see links to the maps you can click on. You see where cooling towers are and look at the data if you'd like as well. So thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Round of applause for... So does anybody have any questions for Chris or Paul? I know we have one online here.
I was just wondering what you saw for results from your fountains and things like that.
Yeah,
Are you testing as much?
Yeah, so the fountains, good question. The decorative fountains have to be tested every 2 months. So we're following, so the federal government through Public Services Procurement Canada requires all of their facilities countrywide to test their cooling towers once a month and their decorative features every 2 months. So we just harmonized with that. So to your question about what we're seeing for decorative features, a lot lower exceedances. We don't see the same kinds of exceedances that we're seeing for cooling towers. There's the odd one, and usually it's some egregious maintenance error. One of them had sewage that was going into the recirculating loop for the decorative feature, but we just don't see the exceedances that we're seeing for cooling towers as much.
Okay, we do have one online as well. Do you have any community misting stations in Vancouver that require these permits when they are deployed in the summer? Or are there any requirements the misting station owners are responsible for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So misting stations, no, there's no operating permit requirement for them. Can they, and maybe the question is alluding to this, is it a potential legionella source? And absolutely, right? You can imagine if you've got a nice long run of small diameter black pipe sitting in the sunshine and the water is periodically going through, you've created perfect conditions for amplifying legionella and then delivering it through a mist. So it is a potential. We don't have operating permits for every single piece of equipment that potentially could cause legionella. Like we don't have operating permits on individual shower heads, right? We're focusing on some of the bigger items right now, like cooling towers, decorative features, non-potable systems. But for anybody who is installing a misting station, and we've spoken with our colleagues in the city who install them, you need to have that constant flow and be very cognizant of not having stagnant water, getting it nice and lukewarm so that you're creating a legionella delivery mechanism, right? So, yeah, good question.
Hi. I was just curious, the City of Vancouver has their own building permit, right? Their own, building code. Do you suspect that that made it easier or harder, or are you aware of any complications that other municipalities would have based on the fact of not having their own building code?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the Fraser Health Authority is particularly interested in what we've done in Vancouver because of examples like Langley, New West, Surrey. And you're right, we have a really unique situation where Vancouver, we have our own building bylaw and this has been integrated into that building bylaw. So how that would work for another municipality, I don't know. The Building Act is pretty strong in terms of how you can deviate from the BC Building Code and the BC Plumbing Code. So I don't know the answer to your question. Like if we've heard that there are a couple of other municipalities, they've reached out to us, local municipalities that are looking into this as well. So whether they create a standalone bylaw, I'm not sure what the mechanism would be for that. So yeah, good question.
Thanks, guys. My question is triggered by some training I had quite a few years ago about power engineering. And there was some mention of bird feces possibly going into the cooling towers. Could that be one of the causes for it, or do we know anything about that?
It could be. I mean, there's when they do studies on this paper just came out last month from New York from their large conference center at the Green Roof, and they were measuring, and they have a huge gull colony there. And when they were measuring what was coming out of that green roof, it included Legionella bacteria, right? So, in a sense, the program, whether it's coming from there's also the potential for other cooling towers to infect other cooling towers. There's evidence that the aerosols from one can go over to another one, and then you've seeded that cooling tower. In a way, from the perspective of public health, it doesn't really matter where it's coming from, as long as you're controlling it, right? So that's why it's so important that whether it's bird feces, the other thing we've heard from the LA Department of Water and Power is that those cooling towers that are near freeways really struggle with their biocides because the aerosols are overwhelming, just consuming all the biocide that's being added. And during wildfire season, same thing. Imagine all those particulates. These are giant air scrubbers, so they'll pull in construction debris, wildfire smoke, and from water treatment, right? If you've got lots of particulates and you're adding chlorine, you're going to have a huge chlorine demand, and you have no free chlorine left. Same idea with the cooling tower. So, yeah, bird feces could be a source. I don't know if any specific outbreak has been traced back to a bird, but yeah, could be.
I have a question if nobody else has got their hand up. I was wondering a little bit with wastewater treatment. We have a lot of odor removal, which is using reuse water, so it's recycled water, that sort of thing. Some of the systems are shut down during the wintertime and fired up in the spring. What sort of mitigation techniques would you use in that scenario?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's been some studies out of the Netherlands particularly where they've looked at wastewater treatment plants in general, and they think they may be sources of outbreaks in the community as well. Just with the large aeration that's happening, you imagine all the water that's being sprayed around. I don't know what the mitigation measure is for what you're describing. They're still learning a lot about where this is coming from. There's a lot of cases that aren't attributed to anything at the end. They look around, try and look for the source. Doesn't seem to be a cooling tower, doesn't seem to be a decorative feature. I know in Tennessee, they tracked some back to washer fluid in trucks. And just we're encouraging truck drivers not to just put water in there and to actually use proper washer fluid. So it's actually fascinating where they're still learning a lot about Legionella. But wastewater treatment plants could definitely be a source, and the Netherlands has done a lot of work on that. So, yeah.
Perfect.
That actually got me thinking. Similar. What about I don't know the mechanism which all the spray parks around Metro Vancouver. The same idea. They have water reclamation. Again, I don't know how that system works, but that is usually some sort of reclamation. And again, it's always when it's hot out, and they're just misters all everywhere. So
yeah, so you're talking about the spray parks for the kids?
Yeah.
So those are different. We don't regulate those in the City of Vancouver because those fall under the BC pool regulation, right? So that's for the local health authority. Those have a lot of scrutiny. And so that, technically it's not, like reclaimed water technically is black water that's treated and distributed. That the spray parks can't use that kind of water. They are recirculating, you're right, the water that's captured. But with those will typically be filtration, UV, all of that, and they're receiving inspections from the authorities, right? So they're really on it in terms of, and they're also worried about the fecal oral stuff as well, right? Like the kid whose diaper is leaking and all of that, right? So yeah. Yeah, so we purposely have not overlapped with what the health authorities are doing with the BC pool reg, but yeah, good question.
All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Sign out.